and MODAC 123 studies. The conflict between or the roles of responsibilities of the Minister and the Director General and senior government officials are not unique only to the Department of Defense. This had occurred in many other ministries over a number of years, arising out of the implementation of the Exchequer Act. However, it was my understanding that the MODAC policies as well as the Defense Review placed the final authority of acquisition, procurement and production of military equipment on the Minister of Defense and Cabinet as the final executive decision-making body of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. You have now dealt with paragraphs 5, 6, 7 of your statement. Just to go back a bit to confirm a few things that I think you did not place on record. On page 2 of your statement, the first 2 sentences on that page, that is the tail end of paragraph 5. You mentioned that you remained in the employ of the DOD until all these investigations were completed, the investigations being those you refer to in that paragraph, and that no adverse findings were made against you. Do you confirm so for the record?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now, at paragraph 6, again, the last line, you rely on the Defense Review, MODAC 1 to 3 studies, and the AMSCO Act as the documents establishing the regulatory framework for your understanding that the decision rested with Cabinet and the Minister of Defense. Is that correct?
Yes, with a slight correction, I may have not deleted the AMSCO Act, and I would like it to be deleted. So I would like to let it read, as outlined in the Defense Review and MODAC 1, 2, 3 studies. Delete AMSCO Act.
Thank you. We shall so do. Chair and Commissioner Musi, before we proceed any further, I was remiss in some respects. When dealing with the issues of housekeeping, I overlooked an important fact. Mr. Shamin Sheikh is represented in this commission by Advocate Nazir Kasim, SC, who is instructed by the State Attorney, and in particular, Mr. Isaac Choe. I wanted to place that on record, and Mr. Kasim is in attendance today.
I am, sir. Thank you. May just from my own understanding at the beginning, Mr. Sheikh is now staying in Australia.
Yes, sir, I do.
Oh, no, thank you. No, just that, I'm raising that question because I know before this commission, there are other people who raise the question of extraterritorial jurisdictions. So maybe right at the beginning, I should say thank you for coming here and coming testify, even if you're staying in Australia, and that we did not raise the question of extraterritorial jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before we leave paragraph 6, Mr. Sheikh, at paragraph 6, towards the bottom of that paragraph, you state, I fully understand the concerns raised by Mr. Stein at the time as the accounting officer of the DOD, but the role of the Chief of Acquisitions and Procurement and the Defense Acquisition and Procurement Division was simply a manager of the acquisition process within the DOD. Can you please explain exactly what you mean by the department and the Chief of Acquisition being the manager of acquisition process within the DOD?
So the role of the Chief of Acquisition was to coordinate, be a single point of coordination between the requirements of the arms of service before it goes into a contracting, which was the AMSCO contracting agency. Prior to that, there was a larger role played by AMSCO in determining requirement within the greater DOD department. So during the initiation of civil oversight role, the Chief of Acquisition position then became a a manager who applied an oversight role between what was procured and what was required. The role of the Secretary of Defense had a high-level budgeting programs and an oversight function. This in some way tried to ensure that what the arms of service themselves wanted was what was procured on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. You've touched on paragraph 7, where you raise the issue of conflict between roles and responsibilities between the ministers and director generals. And at paragraphs 8 and 9, it is so that you deal with some of the peculiar conflicts that occurred within the DOD. Is that correct?
In particular, it was a time when almost all of the management staff within the Department of Defense and Arms Corps were from the previous administration, pre-94. And what was coming out of these negotiations is that this had to change in some way or the other. So you have to contextualize it within the time and the period in which we all came into existence, where there was this integration of the MK, APLA, etc., into a new structure which is alien to itself. And it was literally opposing armed forces members which were integrating. So the culture was different, and I make a note of it, and the previous administration had a different outlook from the very beginning on the way the Department of Defense should be structured. So I try to put a note of that in paragraph 8.
You go further at paragraph 9 to then deal with the detail of this integration process and the subsequent appointment of a first black defense minister and as a NDF general. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. This was one of the, if I venture to say, one of the only departments where a black director general or a black general came in at the later stage. Other departments did have previous good administrators, but in the Defense Department, you first had to go through an integration process, and the integration process was specifically designed to ensure that the right quality and caliber of individual was positioned in the right rank. Now, rank became a serious issue within the Department of Defense, where we had a British agency coming in to evaluate and assist in the integration process. So, yes, so this took some time before we could get a black general. We may have had initially 2 lieutenant generals appointed, but the ultimate decision to get a fully fledged black general coming out of the Department of Defense was as a result of a process rather than an appointment.
Thank you. You then proceed from paragraphs 10 to 16, which is pages 4 to 7, to deal with issues under the heading the National Negotiation Period 1992 to 1994. Before you deal with the contents of these paragraphs, could you explain to this Commission why you deem it necessary to deal with these events which precede the SDP procurement?
Yes, a lot of the MODEX workshop 1, 2, and 3, or the defense review, has its origins in the documents that were discussed during the 92-94 period. You would see, and I will show later, that the topics that arose in the MODEX studies were in fact topics that come from the TEC document, which I call the TEC document, that's pre-94. and the diagrams of the DoD and Arms Corps had the origins in this process. So you have to understand what was the thinking pre-94 and the concerns of Arms Corps and the Department of Defense pre-94 to understand how the outcomes came out of the MODAC studies and the defense review. So this was like a pull-through from what happened before pre-94 to what eventually transpired in the defense review, MODAC defense review, etc. So you cannot look at it in isolation. These are agreements that we reached at prior to the first democratic election. Thank you.
You mentioned in paragraph 10 then that you personally took part in some of the working groups of the TEC.
Yes, I have. In particular is the Defense Industry Working Group that produced a comprehensive document on how the future of the defense industry should look like. There was some concerns at the time about whether a potentially new government would be a supporter to the defense industry sector as the previous one was. So those issues were addressed in the document that was actually submitted to the TEC, Sub-Council on Defense, and it reflects the concerns at the time of what a future defense industry should look like. It brought in issues of offset stroke counter trade as you know it today. There were issues of what level should the counter trade be at? Should it be at $5 million? Should it be at $10 million? A lot of those issues are reflected in those documents. The other one of maybe slight note is the issue of logistics, which required the integration of weapon systems previously held by the non-statutory armed forces, which were largely Soviet Union-based type of equipment. And the concerns were the philosophy of equipment that would be used post-94. There was an anxiety that the non-conventional, and I use the word non-conventional, armed forces like Mkontre Sizwe would be biased towards the Soviet type of weapon systems. So those were issues that came up in the logistics. They may not necessarily be reflected in the Defense Industry Work Group, but what was of concern in the Defense Industry Work Group was the understanding that at the end of the Cold War and at the end of the arms embargo against South Africa, that there will be cheaper imports of military equipment into South Africa that would negatively affect the defense industry that existed at the time within the state.
Thank you. With that narration you have covered, I think your paragraphs 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
If then we can turn to what you deal with at paragraph 15. You had alluded already to the separation of Denel from Armsco, but most importantly, you deal with certain key policies and their dates, the dates on which they were approved or adopted. Do you want to highlight those?
Yes, I don't want to dwell on the MODAC studies. I'm told the Commission has heard about the MODAC studies, other than to say that while negotiations at a national level were taking place, and that is up until April '94, there were parallel I was required to be on some of these transformation and work groups that was busy trying to establish the Defense Secretariat.
From paragraph 21, you deal with the defense review policy period. And again, some evidence has been laid on this. So if you could just confine yourself to those aspects that you believe are relevant to your testimony and to point out.
The important part of the defense review is what is in chapter 13. Chapter 13 is about the acquisition management process, and it pulls in information from the MODAC 123 workshop and from the TEC document that was submitted in '94. Of importance here was that members of parliament were invited in the work group. So the work group that designed and drafted this chapter was a collaboration of arms of service, industry, Arms Corps, Department of Defense, and members of parliament. So members of parliament from different political parties sat in work groups drafting the chapter by chapter of this acquisition management document, that how would acquisition be fulfilled going forward. So this was a collaborative effort. It wasn't as if the defense review was tabled in parliament, then approved in parliament with zero input from members of parliament. In fact, this was one of the few work groups where members of parliament helped draft the chapters of this section in the defense review. Thank you.
Moving then to paragraph 25, you refer specifically in that paragraph to a document you call the report on the findings of the acquisition work group on the boundaries and interfaces between the Department Acquisition and Procurement Division and the Armaments Corporation of South Africa. Could you state the relevance of this document and point the commissioners to anything of significance that you think they should take into account in considering that document?
Yes, because the Acquisition Department, or DEPT, and I'll use the word DEPT, was a new department within the Ministry of Defense and within the Department of Defense. Literally what was happening is that Arms of Service was seconding personnel to this new department. The budgets were being seconded to this new department. The roles of Arms Corps as the exclusive agency to determine the needs and the contracting were also an issue of concern. A work group was formulated between the Arms of Service, my department DEPT, and Arms Corps that worked out the boundaries of each entity within the acquisition family, be it Arms of Service, be it Arms Corps, be it DEPT, be it the project team. So if you look at page 183,
Commissioners, that would be Annexure B3 in File 1.
Of significance on page 183, from this entire document, it's capsulated in a table format. It will show you, for example, who is the process leader, and if you take item number 5, select best option. And the process leader there is the project team. So in each of that combination of the multi-roles played by the various entities within the acquisition, Arms of Service, my department called Defense Acquisition and Procurement Division, Arms Corps project team, you would see a specific function is given to the project team. They ultimately are the ones that open the tender, read the tender, make the evaluation, make a recommendation. So my job was more a manager's role. And in this document, the role of DEPT is defined as a management role of the process. Thank you.
If one has regard to page 158 of that B3, it's, there seem to be dates 1st December 97 to 12th December 97. At the bottom is the 21st August 98. What is the relevance of these dates, if you recall? 158. What is the status or importance of this document generally within the legal framework of the DOD or AMSCO or the acquisition process within those departments?
This document would be then an annexure to the policy document that governs acquisition and the Department of Acquisition and Procurement. So this will give rise to a policy document that will sit within the department. So we'll all will then sing off the same hymn sheet. So this then becomes a policy document.
We have just dealt with paragraph 25, but I omitted to deal with paragraph 24. And in 24, you are dealing with counter-trade offsets, and you have told us the history of counter-trade and offsets. Is there anything you want to highlight in paragraph 24 in particular?
Yes, a lot of concerns about the origins of the offset. Where did they come from? Was this something that was concocted within the department to acquire equipment? And I'm saying that's not true. If you go back and you trace the origins of this word offset, you'll find its first beginnings in the TEC document that we submitted pre-94 elections. So this was a concern raised then by AMSCO and the Department of Defense and the local defense industry that should we acquire equipment above $5 million at that time, then we should strive for a 50% offset. And this number was then started to move to maybe we should get it at 80%. So you'll find that on paragraph 64 and 66, the number then moved to 10 million. And the difference is you now have a DIP and a NIP component within that. Thank you.
Thank you. And you conclude this discussion at paragraph 26, where you mentioned that you mentioned certain findings made by this report in paragraph 26.
Yes. Some of the findings or the issues was related to the conflict of roles, or potential conflict of roles, between the head of department or head of department for accounting. We were one of the few departments that had two heads. We had a director general as the accounting officer in the form of the Secretary for Defense, and you had a director general in the form of chief of SANDF on issues of military matters. So here we're talking specifically to the accounting officer role, and we said in our own workshop, we said there's going to be a conflict between the two roles, and it was highlighted as an issue to be resolved. So it was stated right up in 1997 that there is an issue with the minister's role and the secretary's role in acquisition. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, turning to paragraph 27, you refer to the 1997 approaches by various countries to the Department of Defense with package equipment offers. Now, I must point out to you that Mr. Esther Hazer dealt in some detail with these offers, and I wouldn't want you to engage the commissioners, further unless you have anything you want to add to what he may have said, or to explain why it is necessary for you to make reference to this?
Yes, the reference is insofar as these were new times for South Africa and a totally unique experience for Department of Defense and Armscor. Armscor and Department of Defense functioned in a arms sanctions period. So their policies were not written for unsolicited offers. This is the first time where foreign countries and governments started to approach the Department of Defense and Armscor on providing a package solution. So if you notice, I make specific reference to government. So it was the government of United Kingdom and the government of France, and followed by the government of Germany, etc. So it's the first time governments coupled with companies came to make an offer on equipment.
You deal in paragraph 28 with what flowed from these approaches.
Out of this, the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of SANDF at that time thought it was prudent to write a letter to the then President of the Republic of South Africa, the late Nelson Mandela. And out of that came a directive from the Secretary of Defense to Chief of Logistics in a letter, in a directive dated 9th of June 1997, that started the formalization of creating a work group to start investigating and looking at these unsolicited offers in the view of providing advice or guidance to the minister.
You go on then to deal at paragraph 29 with the establishment of a work group, and you do so with reference to Annexure D. Can you take us through the detail of Annexure D and its importance?
Yes. Annexure D, at that time, there was a tussle of control within the Department of Defense and the Secretariat of Defense. The Secretariat of Defense was trying to establish itself and assumed its oversight role as mandated. So Chief of Staff Logistics at that period used to report directly to the Chief of SANDF. So the Secretary of Defense wrote the letter to the Chief of Staff Logistics, advising him, and under paragraph 6, to put together a work group from staff divisions, logistics, finance, acquisition, policy and plans, arm of service, and Armscor. And he made a request to the Chief of Logistics to include acquisition in this work group. And I am copied as info as Chief of Acquisition. At that point, I was still Chief of Acquisition designate. That's the reference to the letter. Thank you.
And Chair, Commissioner Musi, for record purposes, D appears at page 196 of file 1. You use titles for the various functionaries quite often, and it's quite possible we may get lost. So where possible, please give us names as to who occupied the position of Chief of Logistics as a recipient of the letter, and who was the Secretary of Defense, because I think the commissioners have become more or less familiar with the names rather than the various positions.
At that time, the Secretary of Defense was Mr. Steyn, and the Chief of Staff Logistics post at that time, also sometimes called Chief of Joint Logistics Policy and Support, was Lieutenant General Philip Duprier. So at that time, Lieutenant General Philip Duprier reported directly under his command structure to General Mering.
Thank you. At paragraph 30, you deal with the nomination by the Chief of Policy and Planning of the Chief of Acquisition / designate. Can Can you explain to us, firstly, the title Chief of Acquisition Designate and where and how it arose?
Yes, during that period, I was still holding the post of Director Logistics Policy within the Defense Secretariat. I've been given a letter by the Secretary of Defense appointing me Chief of Acquisition Designate. So, Chief of Staff Logistics wrote the letter to the Chief of Policy and Planning at that time, who I was directly reporting to, asking for nominations to the work group. I was nominated from the Chief of Policy and Planning to serve on that work group, amongst others, and that is listed in Annexure E, page 198. And it reads, Policy and Planning Division nominates the following persons to the work group on the International Defense Equipment Offers. And it was Director Force Structure, Director Strategy, and Chief of Acquisition.
Is it so that, notwithstanding the fact that in Annexure E, at page 198, you are referred to as Chief Acquisition, your correct designation at the time was Chief Acquisition Designate?
That is correct, and it could be found in some of the communique between the Chief of Staff Logistics to myself, where the designate is included in brackets.
At paragraph 31, you then deal with the results of what you have set out in paragraph 29 and 30. Could you share that with us?
It was my understanding at that time that this work group was approved by the Ministry of Defense, and this policy document on how to proceed with this work group. And this work group was then chaired by Lieutenant General Philip Dupree and Eric Estesen. During that period, I'm saying that it should be noted the military works on very strict command structures, that Lieutenant General Philip Dupree reported to the Chief of SANDF at that point in time.
Chair, Commissioner Musi, I see it's just gone 11:15. I do not know if the commissioners would like to take a tea break, or because of the late start, the commissioners are comfortable that we proceed. We intend to deal with this particular annexure the witness has just referred to in some detail. I just wanted guidance whether I should go into it or whether the commissioners would prefer a tea break first.
I suggest that we take a 15-minute break.
Thank you, Chair.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All rise.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner Musi. Mr. Sheikh, before we broke for tea, we were dealing with your annexure F at page 200 of Sheikh 1. $200. Have you located the document? Yes. Okay, please keep your finger on that document and refer to your paragraph, the paragraph 31 of your statement at page 12.
Yes.
In this paragraph? In this paragraph at 31, you state, this request resulted in the approval of a MOD policy by the Council of Defense, COD, on the 8th August 97 in dealing with these defense strategic partnerships. During this period, Lieutenant General P.O. Dupree was the Chief of Staff Logistic reporting to the SANDF, and then you refer to the annexure at page 200, annexure F. Is that so?
Yes, I do.
Just so you are aware, this policy has been referred to previously by other witnesses, but we will deal with it insofar as it relates to you. For the record, could you describe this policy as you understood it?
It was my understanding that this policy gave rise to the work group that was established to deal with the defense acquisition packages, and it was formalized by being submitted to the minister in the ministry, in the COD. It has an origin and a date and a planning directive number on page 200. It says CL, that's Chief of Logistics, / Director Weapon Systems S/R/302/B. That number will then be carried through in the subsequent documents that you'll see, so you sort of have an idea of the origins of it. Thank you.
Now, at the second page of that document, 201, it is signed by General Meyering and Mr. Stein, the Secretary of Defense. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Well, at the time you were the Chief of Acquisition, did you become aware of this policy? And if so, under what circumstances?
Yes, this policy document was the one that the group took as a reference point to formalize its existence, and ultimately resulted in drafting up a constitution to assist the management work group, which was known by many names. Thanks.
Was a copy of this policy, or was this policy ever formally presented to you?
Yes, under page 202, under Chief of Policy and Planning, I'm listed as Chief Acquisition.
So is it your testimony that as Chief of Acquisition you used or you relied on this policy to discharge in part your obligations as set out in this policy?
Yes, I and the rest of the work group did.
Now, there's been evidence before this commission. Now, before I say that, please refer to page 201. You will see a handwritten note there after the signatures of General Mering and Mr. Steyn. And it reads, I quote, approved in Council of Defense 8 August 1997. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, it has been established through one of the authors, and in particular, the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Steyn, that notwithstanding the encryption there, this policy was in fact never approved by the Council of Defense, or at least on the 8th of August 1997. Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
After it was circulated and you received it, did you ever receive any communication from anybody, and in particular the Secretary of Defense, advising you not to rely on this policy because it was never approved by the Council of Defense as alleged at page 201?
No, I did not get any instructions that rescinded this policy.
Thank you. We then move to paragraph 32 of your statement at page 12. And at 32, you deal with the meetings of this interdepartmental management committee. Can you take us through what you state in paragraph 32?
Yes. This interdepartmental management committee was co-chaired by Lieutenant General Philip Dupree and the acting CEO of Armscor, Mr. Eric Estesen, at the time. This was a management committee. The entire word is interdepartmental management committee. But we many times referred to this as a management committee, and it then made presentations to the Council of Defense on the second order value systems on 31st October 1997. So this committee, in its recommendation on COD meeting, the Secretary of Defense was present in the COD meeting, and one of the remarks recorded in that minutes is the comment that the value system was only a decision support mechanism. The politicians have the final say when selecting the best offer. Now, this is a remark that the Secretary made when the whole validity of the value system was questioned. Thank you.
You have annexed, or you referred in paragraph 32 to annexure G, and that appears at page 208 of your statement. Could you go there? This meeting, F1, has regard to item 5.5 of the minutes at page 209, deals with the international offers contender evaluation. Now, a number of issues are raised in this document. Is there anything in particular you would like the Commission to become aware of? Now, at item 5.5.3, it stated that Captain Dewey presented the evaluation value system, explaining the various components. Are you aware of this evaluation value system as referred to in these minutes? And if you page further at page 212, there is a second order evaluation system attached. Are you able to lead the Commission through the nature and purpose of this document?
Yes, this document was to find a way to evaluate the various components within the evaluation that was undertaken, and that was the component of the military, and that was captured in the military value, and the component of the industrial participation, and that was captured in the industrial participation context, as well as the finance. So it was a high level, what they call best value, military value plus industrial value divided by the financing consideration. So there was some concern at that point that financing would play a very important part in the entire decision-making process.
And was it your understanding that this would be the evaluation system to be employed and to assist officials to use during the evaluation phase?
Yes, I did.
You then deal at paragraph 33 with the functions provided by the Chief of Staff Logistics Department and Captain Dewey. Could you take us through that?
Captain Derek Dewey at that time was working under the Director of Weapons Systems, Rear Admiral Kak Verster. Captain Dewey provided a secretariat function to the committee, this management committee, and reported directly to Lieutenant General Dupriya. So he would be the one responsible for drafting the minutes, drafting the the various letters or communique between members of the committee, and drafting the documentation that ultimately would result in a presentation to the COD.
Thank you. At paragraph 34, at page 13, you deal with the meeting of the 4th of March 1998 of the International Government Offers Management Committee meeting. You deal in there with the drafting of the Constitution and the planned briefing to the Joint Parliamentary Standing Committee. Would you like to take us through the contents of your paragraph 34?
Yes. There was a concern raised, I think, by the Secretary of Defense that subsequently to this meeting, a new organization was created. The reference of this meeting in 4th of March predates the 1st of April by roughly a month. This meeting on the it's a many meetings that this International Offers Committee Management Committee had. If you notice, it's quite a long title to give a committee, International Government Offers Management Committee. So it was quite a long meeting. It was commonly referred to as a management committee, a government-to-government committee meeting. But of significance here is the draft constitution that was presented. It's the drafting of the constitution, etc., that was tasked to Kevin Hanifi and Derek Dewey. I'm just trying to find the paragraph where a request was made for them to draft the constitution.
If I may assist you, are you referring to item 4.4 of that minute at page 217?
Yes, thank you very much. That's the one.
Is the Commission to understand that then that on the 4th of March meeting, Mr. Hanafi and Captain Dewey were tasked with drafting a constitution for this management committee? Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Now, who chaired this meeting?
From the minutes is reflected as Mr. Esterhazen.
And you took part in this meeting as well?
Yes, I did, and the co-chair was Lieutenant Philip Dupree.
I would like to refer you to page 216 of that minute, and in particular to paragraph 4.1. Please read that, what's stated therein, and explain to the Commission what that paragraph means.
It's under the heading of Department of Finance Representation. Lieutenant General Dupree requested that permanent membership of the Management Committee be granted to the Department of Finance, and the motion was approved. Mr. Sheikh was to draft a letter of invitation for Mr. Pierstein's signature, and this then subsequently resulted in the letter I drafted for Mr. Stein to sign.
You then speak of a planned briefing to the Joint Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense that was scheduled for the 17th of March 1998. To the best of your knowledge, did that briefing take place?
Yes, it did.
Were you part of the team that was briefing the Joint Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense on that date?
To the best of my recollection, I think I was.
And delivering that briefing to the committee, did the team prepare any document that you could avail to the Commission, or was it a question and answer session purely?
If any such document on briefings, it would be with the secretary of the meeting, who would be charged with the responsibility to compile a set of briefings. So I cannot recall me having such a documentation, but it was a briefing, and if I'm not mistaken, it could have been in Cape Town, but it's been some time ago. But yes, there was a briefing.
You say if there was anything prepared in writing, that would normally be done by the secretary of the meeting. By the secretary of the meeting, are you referring to the secretary of the management committee meeting?
Yes, the management committee meeting. He may not necessarily have been in the meeting himself. He would have compiled it for Lieutenant General Philip Dupree.
And based on what you have previously told the Commission, that secretary would be Captain Dewey?
Yes.
Where's my age? At the conclusion of that paragraph, paragraph 34, you make reference to Annexure H, and that appears at page 214 of your Sheikh 1. Would you go there? I apologize, Mr. Sheikh. We just disposed of Annexure H. Yes. I want, at that annexure H, I would like you to go to page 218. That's where I want to get you. Now, when you find 218, please consider it together with page 219 and explain to the Commission what those documents communicate.
This was a document that in the beginning where the group was trying to get a sense of when it would be in a position to do the evaluation, when it would be in a position to consolidate the results and make the submission to the various acquisition forums. So the table out there reflects some timeline as to when it is possible to brief the minister and the various other fora outlined in 218. The project plan, which is on 219, is basically a more detailed document that shares this is when we think we can get a cabinet decision, this is when we think we can do negotiations. So it was, before we even received the results, what was the expectation of eventually contracting? And that baseline number you could see on contracting comes to very close to the time we eventually ended off under December 99. Thank you.
You say at Thank you. You say at page 218 is a timeline plan. And if you refer to page 215, paragraph 3.1 or item 3.1, is that the master plan of activities and associated timescales presented by Captain Dewey?
Yes.
And on that, in the third paragraph of that item, as regards page 219, is that the project plan that again was presented by Captain Dewey?
Yes.
Okay, now we understand that by the 4th of March 98, the management committee had a master plan and a time scale, and also had a project plan in terms of which it intended to discharge its obligations. Would I be correct in so suggesting?
Yes.
At paragraph 35, if you may turn your attention to that then, you mentioned that after the tabling of the defense review in Parliament and its approval, the appointment of all new divisional chief posts as outlined in the defense review, chapter 9, were approved by the minister. Could you unpack that a bit for us and explain what exactly you're talking about?
Yes, up until that point, I was given a title called Designate, Chief of Acquisition Designate. The defense review in itself detailed under force structure, under Chapter 9, it detailed the formation of the new divisions within the Department of Defense and the closing down of some of the departments. So one of the departments that was new in its creation is the Chief of Acquisition and Procurement Department, commonly known as DEP. The other was a new post, which is now no more Chief of Staff of Logistics, but Chief of Logistics. So that meant that the post of Chief of Staff of Logistics was now made redundant.
Thank you. Your second sentence of that paragraph makes reference to the Third Council of Defense meeting of the 20th March 1998, and you point out certain key issues regarding that meeting. Would you like to explain to the commission what these are?
Uh, 221 going down to 222, etc. The importance of that paragraph relates to page 223, paragraph 5.3.2, where Philip Duprier stated the aims and turn over the page, 5.2.2.4. He stated the aims of the presentation has been to obtain guidance from the Council regarding the overall management.
I'm sorry. So can you just give us a chance to try and follow your evidence? We're still trying to look for those paragraphs. Give us a chance so that we can also try and follow it. Can you start and refer to the relevant paragraphs?
With your permission, if I may. Maybe we should start over. At paragraph 35, Mr. Sheikh, you refer to the Third Council of Defense meeting 3/98 held on 20th March 98. That's correct?
Yes.
Now, at the end of that paragraph, you have annexure I, and that, commissioners, appears at page 221 of Sheikh 1. Mr. Sheikh, do you confirm that these are the minutes of the Third Council of Defense, 398 of the 20th March 98 you refer to in the paragraph under discussion?
Yes, I do.
I had stated that in this paragraph and with reference to these minutes, you make a number of points, and if you could slowly take the commission through the points that you want to bring to their attention arising from this minute.
Yes, there are a few points of importance that were raised at this Council of Defense meeting. The one being was the plan that was discussed at the interdepartmental work group. This acquisition management plan, with its proposed timelines, was presented, where it was indicated in that presentation that there was a shifting to the right of when the work group would be in a position to brief and update the various forums. There was some concern on the pushing to the right of this decision to come and brief the Ministers' Forum or the Secretaries' Forum, and it was recommended that Minister recommended that the group should strive to try to have the evaluations completed in July. So it's the same plan that the management team put together, made a presentation to the minister, and it's that same plan that the minister is saying, come back, try to do it earlier. Pushing it far to the right may not necessarily help the cause of the Department of Defense. On paragraph 5.3.8, if I could just turn to it.
Before you do that, just so the commissioners know where you are, what you've just explained is that what appears at page 224, items 5.3.3 to 5.3.6. Please take a moment, consider that, and confirm if that's where the issues you raise are reflected.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. You may proceed.
on paragraph 5.3.8 was the issue of how we could shorten this time period. I made a recommendation to the Minister that we could eliminate the Armaments Acquisition Control Board and the Armaments Acquisition Steering Board, and thereby shortening the time. What eventually did transpire is that we made a presentation to the Armaments Acquisition Steering Board. We did not make a presentation to the Armaments Acquisition Control Board. The reason being is that this was a cardinal project, and the Acquisition Control Board was chaired by myself and Eric Estezen, and in many ways the management committee did the same function. So an approval was sought from the Minister to present results from one body that you chair to the same body you chair. So we then put this proposal in to say is one way of shortening the time.
So is it your testimony to this commission that much as you had proposed in 5.3.8, that you had proposed the elimination of both the AACB, which you chaired with Mr. Esterhazy, and the AASB, this in fact did not come to pass, and presentations and authority was sought from the ASB as the process unfolded?
Yes, that's true, and largely due to the fact that the AASB had an important role in the sense that it was chaired by the accounting officer of the department, and present to that way the arms service chief. So we thought it was important to hold on to the AASB, even though a recommendation to bypass was made.
Okay, you may continue.
Another issue that was presented by Lieutenant General Dupré is reflected in 5.3.11 on the issue of the management structure and my replacing him as the alternate stroke co-chair. And the issue was largely due to his retirement from the SANDF in end of March.
At 5.3.11, could you please take a moment to clarify to the Commission what exactly General Dupré was suggesting in relation to the structure of the Management Committee?
It's my understanding it's the same management work group that's been working with the projects or the SDPs all along. It was merely my replacing him as the alternate chair on the basis that he was resigning or retiring at the end of March. And it goes on to paragraph 5.3.14. Lieutenant General Dupré explained that he was retiring as Chief of Staff Logistics at the end of March, and for the sake of continuity, he proposed that he would continue to serve as a management coordinator. The post of management coordinator was not supported by the Deputy Minister, and ultimately the Secretary of Defense also did not support that position.
So for the record, if I may read 5.3.11 for clarity, General Dupré was suggesting, and I quote, a management committee comprising of the Chief of Acquisition, which is yourself, is that correct?
Yes.
The General Manager, Aero Maritime of AMSCO as an alternate chairperson, and that was Mr. Esterhazy, is that correct?
Yes.
A Special Defense Package Management Coordinator himself, that is General Dupré?
Yes.
And Chief of Finance?
Yes.
Okay, now you explained that This was necessitated by the impending retirement of General Dupré at the end of March.
Yes.
Now, was a management committee, as suggested by General Dupré, ever set up?
It was, with my understanding, on the page 230.
Sorry, before you take me there, may I correct myself? I asked you a wrong question. You testified that General Dupré was suggesting changes to the management committee. And I said the management committee was being set up, and I realized my error. The question I want to pose is whether the changes suggested by General Dupré in this meeting were ever effected.
The only change would have been my assuming the co-chair position and formalizing the representation from the arms of service.
At the time this suggestion was made, was Mr. Esterhazy already a co-chair or assumed any function of chairing that committee?
Yes, the minutes previously for the Intergovernmental Committee reflects that Eric himself was a co-chair.
I would now like to refer you to, firstly, the beginning of that minute, 221. And just for the record to understand, are you a member of the Council of Defense?
No, I'm not.
You attended this meeting on invitation, am I correct?
Yes, specifically to deal with the package.
Now, the suggestion put forward by General Dupré required the concurrence or adoption by Council of Defense. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Now, please refer to page 227, and in particular, paragraph 5.3.19, which reflects a decision after a number of discussions were had, starting from 5.3.11 through to 5.3.18, including inter alia the newly structured management committee. Do you see that decision?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree that as far as item 5.3.19 is concerned, and I'll read what's stated there for the record, and I quote, General Dupré asked if he may have guidance on the SDP management plan and structure. Underneath, it notes decision. Council will come back to the work group with a final decision. In the meantime, nothing is stopping the work group from continuing with their work. As people not involved in the process, would you accept that from what is stated in 5.3.19, it would appear the COD did not, as at that date, approve the suggestions of General Dupré?
The issue or the points of discussion or the points of non-concurrence was largely to do with the management plan, which affected the timelines. There was concern that the timeline was far much more significant than the structure. The issue of structure had less to do with the decision, and the reason being is that the defense review would have been passed, and the role of the Chief of Staff of Logistics no more existed post-April or post-April. So my understanding, the work group had to continue, and the post of Chief of Logistics does not exist and Chief of Acquisitions post came in too. So we continued with the work group because it wasn't, we felt that it was not, a position was not reached where it was stated categorically that the structure doesn't have to exist, because we were tasked with the function of continuing.
Now, please refer to page 230 of the same file. Is that the management structure as suggested by General Dupree?
Yes.
Having regard to the discussion we've just had about the decision of the COD, was this structure, post this date, actually implemented?
Yes.
Are you aware whether General Dupree communicated to the rest of the management committee as to the new structure that was presented before the COD?
At the very next meeting of the interdepartmental committee meeting, reference is made to the Council of Defense meeting. And nothing is recorded that says that the structure was not approved. The implementation of the structure felt its way through, and if you look at the issues relating to the management structure, there's a bullet point that says, letter to the Department of Finance to nominate a representative. And that is in fact the letter that the Secretary of Defense signed subsequently to this meeting.
When you say at the next meeting or subsequent meeting, are you referring to the meeting of 1st April 98 of the management committee?
Yes, I am.
And Chair Commissioner Musi, the minute of that management committee appears as Annexure J at page 234. Now, Mr. Sheikh, you referred us to this minute, and you say this minute refers to the COD meeting. Unless I didn't quite understand you. What point exactly were you making in that respect?
On page 235, on item 3.2, the chairman requested the minutes of the recent COD meeting be reconciled with the capital budget planning requirements for clarity purposes. There was no other point that said that the structure was not accepted.
Okay, thank you. While we are on that annexure, at item 4.1, there is reference to you drafting a letter for Mr. Stein's signature. Could you tell the Commission what that is about?
Yes. Under that presentation that we made to the Minister, that we read out under the structure, one of the issues I addressed that was identified was to write the letter inviting a representative from Department of Finance. So we followed through that recommendation that we made to the Council of Defense.
If you turn 2 pages beyond that to page 237, and at item 6.3, that item deals with meeting constitution. Could you explain to the Commission what that is?
Yes, this is the first time that a formalization of the management committee was put into effect by drafting a constitution for that management committee. This operated previously under the management directive issued to Chief of Staff Logistics. In that presentation I speak about that was made to the Council of Defence, it was noted under issues relating to management structure, point 1 bullet was letter to the Department of Finance to nominate a representative. 2, constitution of the management committee. So this was a follow-up meeting of the International Management Committee. Captain Dewey tabled the first time a draft constitution, and if I would refer to the draft constitution, it would be on a few pages down, and I think it's page 246.
Now, that constitution at page 247, item 9, the constitution of this management committee as reflected in item 9, is that consistent with what General Dupree had suggested to the COD meeting in March?
Yes.
But at this 1st of April meeting, when this was discussed, the structure was still along the old lines, not recognizing you as co-chair and the other representatives of the arms of service as part of this management committee. Is that so?
Yes, it's the first time that my position that came into effect has now been brought in line with other managers' chief's positions.
If we could just pause for a while at paragraph 36 of your statement. And that paragraph, you mentioned that the Secretary of Defense signed your new management directive as the Chief of Acquisition on the 26th March 1998. What are you dealing with exactly there?
Up until that point, I've been Chief of Acquisition designate. From 26th onwards, I was given a management delegation to now function as the Chief of Acquisition. A copy of that was requested from the Commission Secretariat to provide to the Commission. I do not have one anymore in my possession.
And on what do you rely to give such a definitive date as to when this was signed?
I pulled the date out of my submission I've made to the Joint Investigative Team when I was still in the Department of Defense. So I looked at that document to see what was the exact date. So I'm relying on that document.
So as of the 26th of March 98, you became a fully fledged Chief of Acquisition. In the rest of that paragraph, you deal with the function of Chief of Staff Logistics and the consequences of the confirmation of your appointment. Could you explain to the Commission what all that is about and its relevance?
Yes, up until that point, Chief of Acquisition designate did not have functionary staff underneath him. I was still doing the dual role of Director of Logistics Policy. So when my management delegation was signed, it was my recollection from that point onwards, the Director of Weapons Systems, which manage acquisition of Material 2, or the management of acquisition Material 1 at least, which is weapon systems, then had to relocate his office to my side of the building. So it's about the only time where I started to get staff to come to work underneath me to help me with the functions of acquisition of Material 1 equipment.
Thank you. We now, according to your statement, move on to the SOFCOM period. We have already disposed of what you set out in paragraph 37, and this concerns the meeting of the 1st of the International Government Offers Management Committee meeting of the 1st of April 98. Is that correct?
Yes.
Turning then to paragraph 38 at page 15.
Can I just get clarity on the change of name from the IMC to SOFCOM? When did the name of SOFCOM come into being, and how did it come into being?
Yes, it's reflected on page 246 of the Constitution that was tabled at that International Government Committee meeting of 1st of April. A name change was suggested there only to make it easier to identify. So if you look at page 246, it says International Offers Management Committee, and in brackets it's called SOFCOM. So that's the first time the acronym SOFCOM was introduced, but it's reflecting the very same name of the International Offers Management Committee. It was my understanding that the Secretariat at that point felt it would be easier to refer it to as Strategic Offers Committee, so called SOFCOM.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Musi. Mr. Sheikh, we were dealing with paragraph 38 of your statement at page 15. And in this paragraph, you make reference to a letter prepared for you, for your signature by Captain Dewey, dated the 7th of April 1998. Would you talk us through the contents of your paragraph 38?
Yes, the contents of that letter comes out of that presentation we made to the Council of Defense under the various issues, and we raised it as issues. And one of the issues to be addressed, and that issues is on page 230. I'll go back again. That says, letter to the Department of Finance to nominate representative, constitution of the management committee, which we dealt with. Point 3 on it was appointment of chairpersons or members. So this was to give effect to the appointment of members or chairpersons. So it draws its reference from, again, that name comes through, and it's in bracket on the second line, CL/D, weapon systems.
I apologize, Mr. Sheikh, to interrupt your train of thought. Chair and Commissioner Musi, I think the witness is now referring to the document appearing at page 249, and that would be his Annexure K.
Yes, my apologies. The top part of my copied document showed it slightly different, so it's 249, my error. That document was written seeking appointment, formalizing that appointment to the management team, to the management committee. And the letter was written taking its reference from that management directive, which we see is that number, Chief of Logistics / Director Weapon Systems S/R 302 /6 /B, and it gives it the date as 2nd July 1997. So it was given in effect to formalize this thing. So letters were then sent to, for under action, Chief of Finance, Chief of Log, Chief of Army, Chief of Air Force, Chief of Navy, and Arms Corps to reaffirm their representation to this work group, that although if you go previous minutes, you see those members are sitting in there. We just wanted a formalization of it to say that yes, those members sitting there have the authority to sit there, and they are supported by their respective arms of service chiefs, because again, new chief titles have come in. So it's no more Chief of Air Force. So each of the titles were slightly changed. So the Chief of Staff title was taken out, and the Chief of Logistics title came in, or Chief of Air Force came in. So it's just merely to keep good housekeeping.
Now, at paragraph 2 of that letter, it states that the enclosed draft constitution is presently being considered by representatives that attended the 1st April 98 Management Committee meeting. The constitution referred to here is that the constitution presented to the Management Committee by Captain Dewey.
Yes.
Now, firstly, you state at paragraph 38 that this letter was prepared by Captain Dewey. Why do you so say?
On the top right-hand side, it has a file number as Chief AC / Director Weapons Systems. So that reference is to the party where the file can be located.
And how does that relate to Captain Dewey again?
Captain Dewey was the secretariat for the committee, and he worked under the Director of Weapons Systems, who now reported to myself and previously reported to the Chief of Staff Logistics. And then on paragraph 3, you would see that all correspondence is to go to Captain Derek Dewey.
Now, you said in paragraph 38 this letter was prepared under your instruction. At the bottom, is that your signature appearing there?
Yes.
And below the signature, it has in brackets S. Sheikh, and below that name, typed name, the designation Secretary for Defense, Director General. Were you the Secretary for Defense, Director General at the time this letter was drafted?
No, I was not.
Under what circumstances does this letter come to be issued under your name, designated as Secretary for Defense?
There are different conventions within the Department of Defense on how you write letters on behalf of the department or on behalf of yourself. The convention used by Derek was normally to say Lieutenant General Philip Dupree, underneath it will be Chief of SANDF or Secretary of Defense, and General Philip Dupree would sign. So he followed the same convention. This is about one of the first letters that was written on my behalf when my department was structured. It would have been better or more correctly in non-military convention, or at that time, to have stated my title as Chief of Acquisition, and underneath it, it could have been Secretary of Defense. But no ill intent was meant as we were still working our way through in the newly established department. And under the action for, you would see it went to the various arms of service chiefs who clearly knew I'm not the Secretary of Defense. And for information, it went to the Chief of SANDF, and the letter itself did go to the Secretary of Defense. So, you know, in absence of me seeing an original without the, I would accept it could have been an error in convention.
At the time this letter was issued and signed, were you aware about the wrong designation set out in this letter?
I signed it on the basis that this was the accepted convention applied by Derek at that time. I may not have seen the Secretary of Defense and I merely signed the letter. It's going to be hard for me to say 15 years later whether I knew exactly that was the Secretary I'm signing for, other than to say it's no possible conceived way I could write a letter addressing it to the Arms of Service Chief and making out that I am the Secretary of Defense. That's, for me, it'll be preposterous.
Now, you mentioned that the Secretary of Defense was copied, if that's the right word, on this letter. Is that so?
Yes, as well as the Chief of SANDF.
The Secretary of Defense at the time was Mr. Steyn, is that not so?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Steyn has testified that he first saw this letter when he was preparing to give evidence before this commission, so which would have been 2013, 2014. Are you aware of that?
I've been aware of that subsequently, yes.
If one has regard to page 54 and the distribution list, sorry, page 250, I do apologize, 250. I apologize, Chair and Commissioner Musi. We use, documents are used and reused, and we, I fell for the bigger number. Our numbering is page 250. Mr. Sheikh, I wanted to find out if one has regard to the distribution list as appears in page 250, would I be correct to understand that the Secretary of Defense would have or should have received a copy of this letter around the same time as other addressees, which is around the 7th of April, 98?
Yes, he would.
Lastly, was it ever your intention to put yourself out as a Secretary for Defense when you signed this letter?
No, I do not have any delusions.
Thank you. If I may then proceed to, before I proceed, could you explain does the wrong designation affect any action taken by you in terms of this letter or by the management committee which was sought to be formalized by this letter? In other words, did the wrong designation reflected in this letter affect the process or anything at all regarding the SDPs?
No, absolutely not. It was a continuation, as I said earlier on, of the management directive given by the Secretary to the Chief of Staff Logistics, which is in fact pointed out in that letter. So nothing changed on that. And to add to that, under the action points are the divisional chiefs, which makes up members of the Council of Defense or the Defense Staff Council, which was a member of the Defense Staff Council. So I interacted with each of those divisional chiefs on a daily basis with the Secretary of Defense on a daily meeting in the Defense Staff Council. So the fact that I've sent it to Chief of Finance, Chief of Log, Chief of Army, Chief of Air Force, Chief of Navy, is people who are interacted every day at 7 o'clock in the morning with the Secretary of Defense. So every one of them would have known I'm not the Secretary of Defense.
Thank you, Mr. Sheikh. Now, if we continue to page 16 of your statement, paragraph 39.
I just, before you go further, just get clarification here. Who is the author of this document, this letter of the 7th of April? Who wrote it?
So it would have been my staff, in absence of time. It would have been Derek Jew who wrote it on my behalf to action the appointment of the representatives to the committee.
So this designation, Secretary for Defense, it is the author of the letter who wrote that, not necessarily yourself.
Yes, sir. It's followed with a slight numbering system in the bottom, what I presume would have been on his computer filing system.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Musi. And if I may just pose a final question arising from what Commissioner Musi states. To your recollection, in the period you were an employee of the Department of Defense, have you ever issued or caused to be issued a letter in your name using the designation Secretary for Defense, besides the one before us now?
Could you please repeat the question?
I wanted to find out, to your recollection, has it ever again happened, is issued in your, where it reflects you as Secretary for Defense, except the letter we are dealing with now?
No, I do not. I'm not aware of any other letter.
Thank you. If I may then proceed to paragraph 39. You deal once again with a letter dated the 14th of April, 98. Could you take us through the contents of your paragraph 39?
That would be the letter I drafted for the Secretary of Defense to submit to the Director General of Finance. This is again one of the issues that came up in that plan that we submitted to the Council of Defense, where we seek formally a representation from Department of Finance. So my name would appear right on the top, which means there's a letter I drafted on behalf of the Secretary to request a nomination.
Without moving your finger off that page, is this the letter referred to in the Management Committee meeting of the 1st of April 1998 at page 235, Annexure J, and in particular, item 4.1?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And you mentioned that you prepared this letter for and on behalf of the Secretary of Defense?
Yes, I did.
To your knowledge,
I'm sorry. We're trying to get this Annex L.
Chair and Commissioner Musi, it's from 254. I apologize if I said 235, 254. No. Oh, yeah. If the commissioners have located the letter, the question I then pose to Mr. Sheikh is whether this letter appearing at 254 is the letter referred to in the meeting of the 1st of April of the Management Committee at item 4.1 on page 235. That's how 235 comes into play, Chair. And the witness confirmed that that is the letter that he was supposed to draft. Now, Mr. Sheikh, if I may continue. Is it your contention that Mr. Steyn was at all times aware that you had been mandated to draft a letter of the nature of Annexure L for his consideration and signature? Is that what you contend?
Yes, because that was the presentation made to the COD where he was present, and it was one of the issues that was raised at the COD.
And are you satisfied that as Mr. Steyn signed this letter, he understood exactly what you've just told this commission?
Yes.
I pose this question because Mr. Steyn appeared to have difficulty with the contents of this letter when he testified, and in particular, as to which management committee you were referring to when you drafted this letter. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes. The writing of this letter appears on the very same page of the presentation given to the Council of Defense, which I read out earlier on the issues that need to be fulfilled. So this is on the same management letter, same issues of the same management committee. This is not any new committee. This is a very same committee that he established under his policy directive that was presented to the COD by Philip Duprier on the 20th March, and under that action point was writing a letter to ask for the nomination of a representative from Department of Finance. So it's one and the same committee.
Thank you. Chair and Commissioner Musi, I see it is 2 minutes to 1. We're about to start on paragraph 40, and the issues raised in 40 go all the way to paragraph 45. I don't know if the commissioners deem it an opportune moment to take a lunch break or whether I may continue. I'll be going on to a different topic now.
In the meantime, making a quick observation. I see the typing on page 56 is not the same as the typing on page 50. On page, the typing on 255 is not the same as that on 254. Is there any explanation for this? In other words, paragraph 5 and 6, the typing is completely different from the typing on paragraph 1, 2, 3, and 4. Any clarification of that?
I noticed that, Commissioner. I would like to refer back and come back to it. It's based on documentations I got from the Department of Defense. So other than to say that these are documents I got, there must be some explanation. I can come back to you on that.
Thank you.
We'll take a lunch adjournment, and maybe let's come back at 1:45. Thank you.